I've got lots of fabric scraps, and in this video I'm going to show you two methods of making log cabin quilt. Lots of these are bindings, so they're 2¼ inch wide, so that's going to be my basic width. But I'll show you how to plan using any width. All methods start with your center square. It's typically red or yellow. That's traditional because it represented the fire in the heart of the log cabin. So I do have some red here, and I'm doing 2½ inch squares for the red. Now, as I say, I'm using these 2¼ inch leftover binding strips and some of the scraps that I've got. So you have to decide what width you're using. So I know I need to cut all my strips 2¼ but that's as much cutting as I'm going to do for now. This very first strip is a really small piece that I had left over, and it's 2¼ by 2½ because it has to match this edge. So I'll put those together, and you can see that that one's slightly smaller there. And I'm going to just sew that. I've already got my little bumper in there starting it. I've got some cream thread on here because I'm doing a light and a bright, so I just need something neutral. It's just not feasible to change your thread every row doing this. Stop right there with the log cabin for a minute, because I'm actually going to show you something else that I quite often do. You see, I've got a pile of other fabric here, and these are just leftovers and scraps. Quite often I have them cut into 2½ inch squares. These ones are a little bit larger. Rather than just keep cutting or keep on putting the bumper in between these when I'm sewing like this, I'll just take a couple of these, sew them together. Back to the log cabin. Cut this off. I'm going to press this open, and I'm going to press it to the dark. I'm just going to finger press this one, but normally I will take this to my iron to press it. And then I have another strip here. It's 2¼ wide, but if you can see, I haven't actually cut it to the size I want it. This was just a leftover scrap. This is the actual size it was, apart from that I cut it to 2¼ I'm going to match it at that edge, and I'm just going to sew it the way it is. Use any length strip. Now I'm getting off the log cabin again. I'm picking up 2 of these squares, and I'm sewing them together. I'm not trying to make this confusing, but what I'm trying to show you here is that you can do a whole lot of sewing in this way. Keep a pile next to your sewing machine. Use them every time you would have used a bumper strip, and you'll be amazed how many you get done. Keeping a chain of sewing going is the best way to sew quilts. Most quilters use these little scrap pieces for that purpose. But this is a better use of your fabric, your thread, your time. And you can make the biggest part of a really good scrap quilt. It's a quilt with no effort is actually what it is, because you're making it doing something else. And all these that are double, I'm just going to set to one side. And so on the log cabin, do you see that that hangs over there now? And so what I'm going to do next, let me just turn my camera around so that you can see this. I'm going to lay this on my cutting mat. I can see that it needs to be 4¼ inches, and I'm just going to cut that off. And that basically is just matching that red point. Now I'll open that off, and I'm ready to move on to the next step. So with log cabins, you start with the center, and you always do 2 lights. You just go around, and then 2 darks. So the next thing I'm going to do is add this dark on. And again, you can see it's bigger than I need. I'm going to press this, and then I'm just going to put that there and sew it on. And again, I'm going to open that out. Cut the excess off. And you can do this with really long strips. It just happens that these are shorter strips. If your excess is long enough to use again, put it to one side and you'll sew it onto another quilt later. So now I have to do one here, and again I'm going to use a dark strip. I'm going to do the same method, and I'm just going to repeat that around and around and around until this log cabin block is as big as I want it to be. That's one method of doing this. I'm going to move on to another method, so keep watching and I'll show you that. But I do just want to say something about the fabric first, and that is usually, and it is quite common, to use the same two fabrics. So whatever light you use here, you echo here. And again here, on this one I would use this turquoise here, and then I would get the same turquoise and put it along there. But on this quilt I'm going to make it very scrappy, so I'm not going to match the colours at all. That's not what you're going to see. It's the only rule I've got is this side is going to be light and this side is going to be dark. Alright, so let's move on to the other method, and the one that I am actually going to use on this quilt. I've come over to my cutting table here. Looks a terrible mess, doesn't it? Let me with all this fabric everywhere. But here I'm going to show you the second method of putting the quilt block together, but also I'm going to show you how you can work it out so that you can make a log cabin out of any width of strips that you want to. This is the one I prefer to use. There's nothing wrong with the other one. If you want to do that, you like to stop and trim each time, it works perfectly well. You'll get a good size square in the end. I prefer to cut all my pieces first and then just mix them up as I go and sew them on, and it takes longer in the beginning to do the cutting, but it's quicker to sew it that way. And so this is just what I like the best. I'm going to continue with this piece that I've already made. Here's how to plan a log cabin quilt using any width of strip you want to. I begin making one block and writing down the sizes. Then I'll cut all the pieces at once and chain sew. I already know the centres are going to be 2.5 inches. This top line, this is my width of my strips of fabric. If I keep this paper with my quilt as I'm sewing it, if I put it to one side for some reason and sew something else for a while and come back to it, this will tell me what I'm doing. And I have to confess that I do that. I don't always finish everything straight away. Here you write your width strip you want to use. I'm using up a lot of these binding edges, that's why I'm doing this particular size. So everything I talk about is going to be 2.25 wide. These are going to be the lengths that I'm cutting off those strips. So the first one is the light side, and I've put number 1 because I'm starting with the light side, number 2 because I'll do the bright side second. So the first one is 2.5 inches, and that's the one that I've sewn there. The second one, I measured it along and found it to be 4.25 inches. So those two are done, that half's done. So now we're going to go on to the 2 bright because we're just going around. So on the bright, this one is 4.25 inches. This one and this one are the same size. On the bright side, I've got 4.25 inches. Now I'm going to measure this one, and that measures 6 inches. So the next strip I want to cut is 6 inches. Now you'll see I have a bracketing these two together. That's because if I decided to use the same colours on both sides, which I have to say is what I usually do, but I'm making a particularly scrappy one this time. So if my brights, I needed a 4.5 and a 6.5 for this section, then I would use the same, that colour and that colour. So these two brackets together mean Those are the two sizes that I'm cutting out of this one colour. But I'm not doing that. I'll probably make this quilt with these sizes again though. So if I mark it like this, that'll save me later on having to measure and work it all out again. So I'm going to cut a 6-inch strip in any colour and I'm going to sew that on there. Since we've got this nice bright one out, let's just go ahead and cut a 6-inch colour in this. I don't usually cut that way, but for convenience, let's just do that. Now, when I sew that on there, it's already a perfect fit. All I have to do is match those edges, sew it on, and I'll be ready to come back and measure for the next stage. So my sewing machine is in a different room to my cutting table, so I'm not going to take my camera with me, but I'm going to go through there, sew that on, and come back. So I've sewn that piece on, and now I'm ready to sew the next piece, which is going to be a light. It's always 2 of each colour. I think in the beginning the red is a bit confusing. You kind of have to ignore that, and you're always going to do 2 lights, 2 brights, and you just keep going round and round. So we've done 2 brights, and now we're coming down here with a light. And this one, you won't be surprised to know, is going to be 6 inches because this one was 6 inches. So I've just written the 6 on there, and I'm showing you this so you can see there's like a pattern forming. So 4 1/4, 4 1/4, 6, 6. And I know that's the way it is, but I still write it down because when I come to cut this big pile of strips, it'll be really easy to get confused about which one I'm cutting in which colour. So I always do just write it down. So now I want a light to go along here. And I think for this light, I'll use this pink. So again, I'm just going to cut a 6-inch strip. If you make a lot of quilts, you'll find it's good to save these offcuts of binding. And there always is some. I don't think I've ever made a binding where it fit exactly at the end and didn't have any leftover bits. And 2 1/4, it's a bit of an unusual size to make a log cabin, but you can make them out of any size, it really doesn't matter. May as well make use of what's already been cut. There's my 6-inch one cut. I'm going to put it on there, sew it. When I come back, I'll just repeat. And so for this first block, that's all I'm going to do. Each time I sew it, I'm going to measure the next edge so I know what size to cut, write it on my chart, and when my block's big enough, I'll know what to do and I'll cut all my strips. I'm going to go ahead and finish doing that, and when I've got the whole block made, I'll show you what the sizes are. This is the whole list finished of the sizes I'm going to cut for this quilt, and I'm going to hold on to this list because I know that I'll make more, because I know I'll always have binding left over. This is a great way to use it. So here's that first block done. The finished size is 13 inches, and you can see all the whites are this side, all the brights are this side. I took all my measurements, wrote them down on my paper, and now I'm going to start doing all the rest of the blocks, and I'm going to chain sew them. So here I've got all the pieces cut. I cut all the longest lengths first. There's always bits left over for the small parts. My strips are all cut. Keep watching and I'll tell you why I enjoy sewing these scraps together so much. I'm going to chain sew, so I'm getting all my centres, and then the next thing I need is all my 2 1/2 inch, the smallest size of the whites. That's those here. And I'm just going to go ahead and chain sew those on and then press them. Because I'm chain sewing, I wouldn't be putting many bumper strips in between, so I won't be getting many of these squares for the secondary quilt done. But I'll keep them by my machine, so I'm ready anytime to use them. And chain sewing just makes everything go so quickly. And the secondary quilt square to end this. So that's all 15 done. I'm going to clip these apart, press them, and once I've done that, I'll move on to sewing the next row. So one thing I was going to say about this was that my only rule when I'm putting them together like this is to try not to put the same colours next to each other. So for example, this green one, when I sew this next strip on here, I'll try not to put the green, and when I come back and put the next light again, I'll try not to put the green. By the time you get to the end, it doesn't always work out like that, but I try to get as much variety as possible in a scrap quilt. Now, I don't really need to show you all this machining because... Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over my sewing machine. Because I showed you when I was putting the other block together the basic way that I do this. What I do though, I make sure that these are all facing the same way. I usually do this when I iron, but I forgot in this case. And then I have this sitting to one side, and I'm just going to, one by one, sew these on here. I've worked it out that these blocks I'm going to need 16. So I've made one already, I'm sewing another 15 here. When I've done that, I'll just sew them all together and that'll be done. So that's the way I'm going to do this. I'm just going to go and get on and sew it. The first round is done on these. So each one's got 2 lights and 2 brights. And now I'm starting back at the beginning down here, and I'm doing down here, and I'm going to do the next 2 whites for the next round. So I'll go ahead and do that. I was going to put another strip on before I show you this next round. I have them cut here ready to put on, but I stopped here because I wanted to show you something that I did here that I really need to watch out for, and if you do this you should watch out for it too. So when I ironed this, suddenly it all got stuck up, and the reason for that is that into my scrap bag I have put some stuff that I've done applique on. And so I like to use this Misty Fuse, and I don't know whether you can see or not, but you really can't see on the back there that that's on there at all. But it's actually the sticky webbing that will fuse this to another fabric. So of course when I tried to iron it, because the way I iron is I always set the seam and then open it and press. As soon as I touch the iron to that, everything's stuck together. So now before I can do any more, I've got to clean my iron. But as for this piece, I will still use it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it marked so that I realise that it's this piece and I don't iron on that section again. So once I've cleaned it, as long as I iron on this side, it'll be okay. And just as a protector, what I can do is put some paper on the other side of that, because when I put the next row on and I iron that row, otherwise this will stick to my ironing board. And I won't show my ironing board cover because it's much too embarrassing. It's been really fun doing this scrap quilt, as it always is with quilting, because as I look through, you know, I see fabric that I like, and I remember for a specific reason. I think maybe that's one of the reasons I enjoyed scrap quilting so much. It's not just the using up the scraps, which I do really like to use up the scraps, but it's also as I pick a piece up and I think to myself, oh, I remember making that quilt. So this fabric here, my husband wanted a quilt with dragons on, and I made him a quilt, and that was one of the fabrics that was in there. This one, and actually this little pink here, was in a quilt that I made for my daughter. She wanted a quilt with dinosaurs, but the dinosaurs had to be pink, and so I made her pink dinosaurs. And then some fabrics I just particularly like these really bright ones here. These are Cafe, I think that's how you say it, facet fabrics. I made a lot of quilts for donation that were bright green frogs, and that's left over from that. This is actually quite old fabric, this one, and I just really loved this fabric, and these are the last tiny little bits of it that I'm using up now. And one last one I'm going to show you, this one. I know you can't really tell what this is, but it was actually a fabric with some wolves on, And I remember this because I went on a day trip with my sewing group, my quilt group, and we went to a quilting shop that's a couple of hours away, 4 or 5 of us in a van, and we all spent a fortune on fabric and had a really good time. Stopped at a burger place on the way back, and this is one of the fabrics that I bought from there. So yeah, I don't know, I could go on and talk about these fabrics a lot more, but I don't need to say too much. I'm just kind of giving the idea about how these fabrics just come to mean something to you. And it's great to feel like I'm using them up and somebody's going to get some pleasure out of them. So once I've cleaned my iron, I will go ahead and add this last row. And now I've mixed it in, I need to pull it back out again. There it is. Add this last row of colours on, and then I'll be moving on to the next round. Here are my blocks all finished, all different, and now I'm going to lay them out into a pattern on the floor and just sew them together in rows. There's 16 blocks here with the original that I made, and I'm going to lay it out with a diamond in the centre. So I'll lay that out and then show you what it looks like. So that's just roughly laid out on the floor in the design that I'm going to do. I think that's going to look really pretty. I'm just going to sew this together now in rows. Let me come down here. I'm going to sew one row at a time. So I'm going to flip this one onto this one, this one onto this one, and sew those two, and then I'll join them, put them back down. The important thing is to keep these the right way round. It is easy to get mixed up which way you're putting them when you're picking them up and putting them down. Once I've done each separate 4 rows, then I'll just join the rows together. And the quilt will be just about done, just need a border and finishing off. Now in this case, I am pinning these. I don't have to do a massive amount of pinning, I just want to make sure the edges meet up. So I'm just putting one at each end of the block and one in the centre. And that should be enough just to hold this in place for me to sew. And I have used a 1/4 of an inch seam throughout this. I'm not sure if I said that before. It's really hard to see sometimes which way the pattern goes. So one tip I have is to take a photo and look at it, or look at it through the camera as I'm looking now. You can tell whether or not you've got it laying in the right place. Looking at it live, it's just not so easy to see. So I'm going to press this now and move on and make the next row in exactly the same way. And when I press it, I am going to press it so that all the blocks on this row, the seams go one way, and when I do the next row, I'll make sure the seams all go the other. That way I'll be able to nest my seams of these blocks together and get a nice neat finish. I'm going to sew my last strip together here. And I just wanted to show you that how I nested these seams, which I think I've shown this on other videos, but it is an important thing just for you to get a better finish. If you don't do this, your quilt still will work out, but your seams might not look as good at the matching points. So as you can see here, this is where 2 of the large blocks are sewn together. And I've made sure that this seam on this front one goes that way. Do you see that? And the one on the back goes in the opposite direction. And then when I put them together, I just you can feel those joints snuggle up and put a pin in it. And now when I sew that, when I turn it the other way, I know I'll have a nice straight pointed corner there. So if I pull this one out of a corner that I've already done where that was done, do you see that? How all the points come together in the right place. So let's go on and sew this seam. It's sewn together now. I'm going to measure it and make some borders. This is the fabric I'm going to use for the border. I think that'll look quite nice. So I've got my ruler and rotary cutter out, and I'm going to cut 2.5-inch strips for the border. That'll make it in the area of about 54 inches square, which is what I usually make for donation quilts. And you can see here I've still got plenty of scraps left. Probably enough there for another quilt. So I've left them out. I'm going to do some more cutting and see if I can use some of these scraps up. Because the truth is I've got other bags of scraps, you know, these aren't the only ones, and I just hate to throw them away. And this really puts them to pretty good use. Now, of course, this part is the same for all quilts, both for the binding and the border, which is cut the strips, find a 45-degree line, and put your ruler on there, and mark it. And you do this because you're going to sew this into strips. So I'm going to clip all these, and then I'll have a long strip of fabric. I'm going to press these open, which is unusual in quilting, isn't it? But these do get pressed open. And I'm going to trim these extra little diamonds off, extra triangles off. I'm going to take this strip and I'm going to cut 2 strips that are 50.5 inches long, because I've measured the size of my quilt sides and that's what it needs to be. I've just got the last of the borders pinned on here, and I'm just going to sew it on, and then this quilt top will be done. This quilt is all done now. I'm just going to move it around a little bit because it's a bit hard to fit it all into this shape of picture. This is just the quilt top. It still has to be quilted and the binding put on. So I have some quite pretty material I think I'm going to use for the back, but I think that looks pretty good. It does still have a few creases in. It's always like that with scraps. When it's quilted, they won't be noticeable. This is a really easy quilt. It's great for beginners. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.